to activate the NAB, and so we have a lot of firepower. So the quota review, etc., if it had taken place, it would have given us more permanent resources rather than these borrowed resources. But we do have the size of the fund that was envisaged with or without the quota reform. So that's on the quota reform. Second, would an SDR allocation be helpful? I don't think it could, but I don't think the membership is there yet. More importantly, even last time in 2009, it took 5-6 months to get that through. This is a crisis where we really, really need to do what it takes now. Households are hurting now, firms are hurting now, and the tools we have at our disposal, I think, for the time being, are up to the task. As I said, we have immediately moved to double how much resources we can make available through rapid dispersing facilities, resources that do not have the traditional conditionality attached with them, and can quickly boost governments, coffers to mount some social protection to address the health spending needs that they have, so that is going to disperse very quickly. We can also very quickly engage in discussions for those countries that want to tap into, more medium-term programs. We can also engage in those discussions once we've got the immediate needs out of the way. So I think we have, frankly, quite a bit of cushion to use to support the membership.
Over the next couple of months, it abates in Europe and also begins to abate in the US. That Asia is to keep up a certain level while still, restarting their economies, maintain control of the virus, and that in Africa the worst can be contained. What for you are the various scenarios of recovery for the global and for the African economy out of this current situation?
So, right now our working assumption is that in the region, but elsewhere also, these extreme shutdowns that the countries have had to adopt to contain the spread of the pandemic will be limited to about a 12-week window. After that, we expect gradual normalization into the rest of the year and recovery into 2021. So this we know is kind of a relatively optimistic scenario, and that there's a lot of uncertainty around whether this will be feasible. And we're the first ones to put our hands up, and why in the numbers we've been putting out, we've been we've been making very clear that there's a huge degree of uncertainty, huge error bands around the projections that we are presenting to the public. I think within this broad outlook for the global economy and the broader sub-Saharan Africa region, it's almost inevitable that you're going to see parts, the various sectors of the economy coming out of this crisis at different pace. So I would expect, sectors like construction probably will be relatively quicker to resume activity and go up to full speed. Whereas sectors like tourism, travel-related activities probably will be slower. I think there is going to be wariness to travel for a while still, probably restrictions on movement of people and the like. So those kind of sectors may be slower to recover. So, we do expect this sectoral variation. And of course, to the extent that countries rely a lot more on tourism than other domestic activities, say manufacturing type activities, you could also see some variation across countries in that vein. For the commodity exporting countries, for example, oil exporters, I think a lot is going to depend on how quickly oil prices recover back to their marginal production cost levels globally. There's a big question around that. So I think it's going to be quite varied pace of recovery that we're going to see across countries. As well, how much support you've been able to provide your economy, how much you've avoided companies facing temporary liquidity problems, you know, becoming bankrupt, or, you know, how effective you've been at avoiding that will also matter. So really very complex policy-making environment that countries have to deal with in the next few months.
On the collapse of the oil price, and I think in other areas as well. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. ExxonMobil has just kicked into the long grass a final investment decision about their big Mozambique investment. We're not expecting to see production there until 2030. A lot of oil companies are looking at a very, very tough moment. Again, taking the sort of silver linings approach, is this a moment that countries could seize to try and do genuine diversification? And if it was, what would that look like? What would they have to do?
We've been talking about an ugly cocktail of shocks that has hit the region. The global demand shock, the oil price shock, on top of the domestic demand slump that we've seen in countries. And for the oil exporting countries, of course, there's both a near-term and a long-term hit, which is really very, very significant. I have to say, already the decline in oil prices in 2015 that we saw was giving some impetus for reforms and had prompted countries like Angola to do really very courageous reforms to try and transition their economy away from reliance on oil, to undertake, reduce the imbalances that were there, eliminate subsidies and the like. This, of course, will give things another impetus, but it will also complicate their adjustment path. The same for economies like Nigeria. If our countries, our heavily commodity reliant countries, don't take this moment to bite the bullet and do the required diversification, we never will, right? It's being forced on countries without choice anyway. So yes, it is a fertile environment to think about how we can wean our countries off reliance on single commodities. But one thing that complicates this transition, if you will, is you do also, of course, need resources to invest in much needed infrastructure for things like development of agriculture, development of manufacturing sector, power supply, for example, in Nigeria. So you're also facing a hit in how quickly you can do this transition. So it really requires countries to redouble their efforts. So it's not just about the willingness to entertain diversification, but even if you wanted to, the resources you need will not be there. So redoubling efforts to do necessary reforms will be important.
Fantastic. Last question. As someone who is being forced into a series of virtual for the IMF, what is your tip to a successful webinar or successful virtual meeting? What are the must-dos and must-don'ts?
A comfortable chair really is important. Like everybody else, I have right now my kids also at home, homeschooling. They've taken my office. I'm sitting in a dining chair, which is very uncomfortable to sit in for very long hours. So I've had to order a chair, and that hasn't been delivered. But that is really important. Second, I think really important also to get up and stretch one's legs as much as possible. I have. One of the things that has happened to us, of course, is that the workload has gone up at the very time that we're not in the office. We're not able to do our usual way of doing our work. So it has required us to be sat in front of our computers for many, many, many hours. And so getting up once in a while to stretch one's legs and having some of these meetings standing up also, I find is very helpful. So those are the 2 tips I can offer.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Our thanks to Abebe Selassie, Director of the IMF's Africa Department. Don't forget to sign up to our daily briefing to keep on top of all our coronavirus reporting, and visit our Facebook and Twitter feeds for the blow-by-blow. I'm Nick Norbrook. Thanks for listening.